So let's finish up the Gorgias. The last person that speaks is Callicles. Um, so Callicles jumps into the conversation, um, and you have this doesn't come through very well with the translation. Um, he is he's like you're crazy, Socrates, and kind of being belligerent. Um, there are clues in the text that point this out. For one thing, Socrates immediately insults him, which just because why would he do that? Well, because Callicles is kind of getting in his face. That's kind of what's going on. He's getting up in his face and being kind of brutish, I guess you would say. So is Socrates going to back down? By the way, Callicles seems like he's probably a pretty big guy. Does Socrates back down to this bully that's getting in his face? No, he doesn't. He insults him instead. And the way that he insults him is also extremely subtle. He says you can't disagree with Demos or Demos. Demos with a capital D is a person, and in this case, it's Callicles' boyfriend. I don't know, did I talk about this before? Probably not. Okay. All right. I guess I better go there. So in ancient Greece, particularly Athens, there was a system of, look, it's more like being a mentor and a mentee. It's like a mentoring system where a young man would hook up with an older man that would be his mentor, someone other than his father that would kind of guide him into citizenship and help him out in his life. Was it sexual? Homosexuality was pretty prevalent back then, but not even generally, not even usually. Usually, it was just just this relationship of mentor and mentee. The thing that makes it boyfriend, the reason that term is appropriate for this reason, because it wasn't like people were assigned. It's not like, hey, you are going to be the mentor of that guy, or you're going to be your mentor. It wasn't an assignment. They decided themselves who would be their mentee or their mentor, both. It had to be a mutual agreement. And so if you look at how the process unfolds, it's kind of like dating. It really is, because the young man would be looking for an older man that had, connections and something to offer. And the older man would be looking for a younger man that had potential and seemed like he was going to be a good person that would make him proud, So it kind of was like a dating kind of thing. But I don't want to emphasize it wasn't necessarily a sexual thing at all. It's more like it's an interesting social construct to have like this mentor-mentee thing going on. Socrates did have a boyfriend too, who got him into a lot of trouble. I usually mention that in the when I talk about the Apology. It may have been something that contributed to him getting taken to trial, because his mentee, his boyfriend, turned out to be a traitor. That was not good. His name was Alcibiades, by the way. But anyways, okay, so they have this system, and you do see it come up in the dialogues where people talk about it. It comes up in the next one as well a little bit. But so Demos is a person. Demos is a young man. He's the mentee. He's the boyfriend of Callicles, and Callicles, the older man, is supposed to be guiding him into adulthood. And when he says you can't disagree with Demos or Demos, he's saying basically he's saying this young man pushes you around and you give him whatever he wants. You can't disagree with Demos. This guy, this young guy is just kind of pushing you around all the time. And then demos with a lowercase d means the people, okay? Democracy means ruled by the people. So demos with a small d is the people. And this is an insult because Callicles, he's not a sophist. I know that so many people say that. He's not a sophist. It's pretty clear from the dialogue that he's not a sophist. If you read it carefully, he's not. He's a politician. But that is insulting if you're a politician, because he's basically saying, hey, you don't really have any convictions. You don't have any, you know, you just go with whichever way the wind's blowing. You just, that's your political view. You have no backbone as a politician. And so that's an insult as well. Anyway, so he says, Socrates insults Callicles. Callicles insults Socrates back, of course. He says, philosophy's for children, kids. He says, really cute when you're young and you go around talking about these subjects. But at some point you got to grow up and get a real job. And he actually says, Socrates is not a real man. I mean, you're not a real man. I should give you a beating. I mean, he's threatened to kick his ass pretty much. You can see there, especially that Callicles is kind of this bully character, that being sort of belligerent. Callicles says, public men may look ridiculous in these discussions of yours, but philosophers look ridiculous to the public at large. Maybe you make a fool out of people when you're talking to them, but everybody thinks, in general, everybody thinks you're a fool. And then Callicles pulls out his point of view. He says, by nature, might makes right. That is, if you're the strong should rule. Okay, the strong should rule. Might, the strong should rule. He says shame is conventional. It's something that people make up, particularly, in particular, the majority, which are, most people are weak, and they preach this kind of equality and these ideas of shame. Well, when you say shame, justice and morality in general is what he's referring to here. They preach this kind of justice and morality just so that that the weak don't get stepped on by the strong, which would generally be what happens. But that's what should happen according to Callicles. It should be the case that the strong rule. That's how it happens in nature. If you look at a lot of animals, it's the alpha male that rules. It's the strong rule. That's the natural way of things. He also says a big strong nation next to a small weak nation. The strong nation is going to take over the weak nation. That happens. That's just the way it is. That's the natural way of things. We should go by nature. By nature, the strong should rule, and might makes right, and we should follow nature. Forget this conventional crap about justice and morality and equality and all this other ridiculous jazz. Hey, by nature, the strong rule. That's the way of the world. Socrates' first response is that, well, you're saying that the majority of people are weak. And if that's the case, then it's sort of obvious that if the great majority of people are weak and they decide to take on the strong don't have a chance. It's like, am I going to try to beat up? Unless you're Bruce Lee, you're not going to beat up 20 people. I mean, if the weak outnumber the strong, then the weak are the strong, right? The weak are the stronger, and therefore the two align, so that if the strong is the majority and they think that we should have justice and such, then convention it lines up perfectly with nature, because the strong, and by nature and by convention, they're the stronger. And here Callicles comes back and says, I don't mean just physically stronger. He says, as if a rabble of slaves should take over their master, because the slaves would probably be stronger, physically stronger than their master, but I mean wiser too. And then Socrates points out that, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but Socrates sort of points out that, what do you mean by wiser? And it doesn't seem like Callicles has a grasp on what wiser really amounts to. And then Callicles backtracks more. He says, I don't mean just, that. I mean, the stronger, the better, the wiser, the more courageous in affairs of state. That's what I mean by the stronger. By the way, you can see that Socrates is trying to press him on what he means by, when he says the strong, what does he mean when he says the strong should rule? What's strong? Is it physically strong? That certainly sounded like what he meant in the first place. Then he backs off of that. And then he says wiser, and he's not really defending that very well. And so he just keeps retreating and redefining what he means by stronger. And Socrates is trying to pin him down on what do you mean by stronger? And so he says, the better, the stronger, the wiser, the more courageous in affairs of state. At this point in the dialogue, something is becoming pretty obvious. And because what Callicles really means is me. I should rule. I mean, he's not, people that are better than everybody else, like me, richer, more powerful. He's a big guy. He's wealthy. Me. I should rule. That's what he's saying, and that's why Socrates kind of turns this conversation to this topic. He says, "Is a man his own master? Is a man his own master?" Kind of an interesting way to go. What he's asking here is, hey, shouldn't you be able to control yourself before you're trying to control everybody else? Like, are you your own master over your own life and your own self first? And before you want to impose your will on others, can you master your own self? It seems like a plausible idea, and kind of obvious that Callicles has a little bit of trouble mastering himself. He just has these emotional outbursts. So you would think that Callicles' answer would be, yeah, of course, you have to be your own master first. No, not at all. No. Callicles, by the way, he said earlier, he said to Paulus, you accused Gorgias of being ashamed to say what you really think, and then you did the same thing. You were too ashamed to say what you really think. I'm not going to be ashamed. Callicles is never ashamed. Never ashamed. This guy's just going to go for it. He's like, be your own master, forget it. No, let your appetites go unchecked. Go crazy. Get whatever, food, sex, whatever you want, material possessions, whatever it is, go get it. The thing that's shameful is if you're a tyrant and you don't do that. Justice and temperance is pretty much moderation. Justice and temperance, that's what's shameful. If you're a tyrant, you should just go for everything. Get what you want. Let your appetites go crazy. Socrates responds by saying, the foolish soul is like a sieve. This, by the way, he borrowed from one of the pre-Socratic philosophers. I never remember which one, but one of them had this analogy. The analogy is this. So a sieve is like a colander, a bowl with holes in the bottom. It's a container with holes in the bottom of it. So you pour water in, for instance, and it drains out the bottom, and you pour water in, and it drains out the bottom. And he's saying that's what a fool is like, because you get more sex, and you get more food and you get more possessions and whatever you get. Your appetites are going unchecked and but it all keeps draining out the bottom. You need more and more and you keep pouring it in and it keeps coming out the bottom. In other words, basically it just means a fool is never satisfied. If you're a wise person, you don't have holes in the bottom of your vessel, your bowl or whatever it is. And so you pour liquid in or, fulfill some of your appetites and you're happy. Order and temperance, moderation, alone provides satisfaction. Does this convince Callicles? Not at all. Callicles says, no way, no. The life of pleasure requires the greatest possible influx. Let it leak out. Pour more in. Go for it. Okay. Socrates says, so you sounds like the life of a calamite would be perfect, which means that calamite, I don't know, like eczema or something. It's like where you have a skin condition where you're constantly needing to scratch and you're constantly scratching. Hey, that sounds perfect because you're constantly having a appetite or desire and you're constantly fulfilling it by scratching it. Callicles says to this, you're a true mob orator, Socrates. In other words, he's not buying that either. He's sticking to his guns. All right, so Socrates turns to a more technical way of confronting Callicles' argument, and that is this. He says, so what you are proposing is that pleasure equals good. That is, they're the same thing, equals. Pleasure is good, and by the way, pain is evil is the other part of this. This idea is called hedonism, and it's been around. It was around before this, and it's still around. I mean, the idea of pleasure equals good and pain is evil is very prevalent in philosophy for a long time. The biggest proponent of this is Epicurus, who was a philosopher, I don't know, a couple hundred years after these guys. If you ever read Epicurus, it's a pretty, it's not at all what you would take. It's much more sophisticated. It's a much more sophisticated view on this idea of hedonism. Callicles has a very naive view. I mean, it's just like get as much pleasure as possible. Which, by the way, in English, if you call someone a hedonist, that's basically what you're saying about them. They're just chasing skirts all day and like playboys or something. Hedonism is pursue pleasure all the time. And that's what Callicles says. Yeah, that's exactly right. Get pleasure. Pleasure's good. Pain is evil. Get as much pleasure as you can. Now, Socrates offers a couple of arguments to counter this idea that pleasure equals good. One is that you can feel pain and pleasure at the same time, but you can't be good and evil at the same time. It's not a terrible argument. I mean, first of all, it's obvious that you can feel pleasure and pain at the same time. You could be eating a steak dinner and have a sprained ankle. That's obvious. Can you be good and evil at the same time? Now that's a little bit, maybe. Socrates, or Plato, the writer here, seems to think that that's impossible. You can't be a good person and an evil person at the same time. Yeah, all right, maybe. It's not a terrible argument. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't know how good it is, but it's not horrible. Under 11 here, though, this argument is a very good argument, I think. He says, the wise and the foolish, the brave and the cowardly all feel pleasure and pain to an equal degree. So if that's the case, if pleasure equals good and pain equals evil, then if the wise and the foolish should be equal in terms of being good. And so the brave and the cowardly should be equal in terms of being good because they're feeling the same amount of pleasure and the same amount of pain. But that's not, but it can't be the case that being wise is equal to being foolish. You don't agree with that. Neither do you agree with the fact that being brave is equal to being cowardly. Wise is better and brave is better. So it can't be the case that pleasure is the only thing that is good, right? And therefore, some pleasures are better and some are worse. It depends on whether it's for the sake of the good. This is kind of starting to backtrack the things he already kind of mentioned when he was talking about talking to Paulus, for instance. This is decided by the experts. This kind of goes back to the cook and the doctor thing. Some expert is needed to decide the pleasures that are good for the soul, as opposed to a doctor that decides which ones are good for the body. So, Callicles, he doesn't agree, but he just says okay. And then Socrates goes on, he talks about music and poetry is flattery, and rhetoric is flattery too, because it neglects, neglects the common interest. Here you can, by the way, this is a real good clue that Callicles is not a sophist, because he says rhetoric is sometimes good and sometimes bad. You know, if he was actually a sophist, he wouldn't say rhetoric is bad sometimes. So there you go. He's not a sophist. All right. Socrates says order and discipline produce health in the body, and justice and temperance produce health in the soul. And here Callicles quits the argument. I mean, he's just fed up. He just says, all right, I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm tired of talking with you. And he wants to leave. And the crowd around him says, hey, come on, Callicles, just stick around and hear out the rest of the argument. And he caves in. He can't disagree with Demos. That was, that sort of feeds to that same thing. But he does kind of quit. I mean, after this, he doesn't even try to argue back or respond at all. It's just Socrates going on and on and on and on for a long time, which is super ironic because he started this whole dialogue by saying, keep your answers short. And now he's going on a big tirade. And Callicles is just saying, yes, whatever, yes, whatever, yes, whatever, yes, whatever. When is this going to be over with? That kind of thing. Look, I think the way to kind of look at this is that this is Plato pulling out all the stops. He's just trying to convince you that trying to be a good moral person is worthwhile, and he's pulling it like everything in the kitchen sink. I mean, everything you can think of, he's just going to put it in there, and like he says, the temperate, the just, the pious, and the blessed are happy, and everybody is not. The undisciplined are incapable of fellowship and friendship. That is to say, if you're not a moral person, you're not going to have any friends. Oh, good point. The universe is ordered. This kind of sounds very Pythagorean. It's not like discord and riot, and therefore your life should be ordered. And then he kind of swings around to, and so in conclusion, to do wrong is worse than to suffer wrong. And if you align yourself with a tyrant, you can avoid suffering wrong, but you're going to do wrong, right? Because the tyrant may not come after you, but you're going to do something wrong on behalf of the tyrant. All right, I've got a couple more points to make here. One thing that's really important is when I ask this question in the essays, I say, how does Plato confront Callicles' argument that might makes right and the strong should rule? I did not ask, how does Socrates confront the question? Even though that should probably be included in the paper. But what I really want you to think about is how Plato he's the writer. He's not, I hope you're getting this clear. Socrates is the guy speaking in the dialogue. Plato wrote it. How does Plato trying to get across that Callicles is wrong? Well, he does not do it by having Socrates win the argument, which he could have had that happen. Socrates does not win the argument because Callicles just quits. He never relents. He never admits defeat. He doesn't. But that's kind of precisely Plato's point, because in the face of being refuted over and over again, Callicles won't. He'll never admit he's wrong, ever. He's a bully. He's belligerent. And he's ignorant because he will not follow the argument. For the truth, we must follow the argument. He won't follow the argument. He won't admit that when he's wrong, obviously wrong. Every time he gets cornered, he just changes his view to something else that is equally wrong. And I mean, the guy, there's no way to change this guy's mind. But Plato's point kind of is by the way he presents him as a character, because do you want to be like this guy? He's a bully and a jerk, and he cannot reason. He won't, or he refuses to, something like that. You don't want to be like this guy. And this is the kind of guy that thinks that might makes right, the strong should rule. You don't want to be that kind of person. It's the way he presents the character that makes the argument. It's not what the guy says. All right. Let me see. All right, I'm going to kind of just wrap this up. Socrates says that a couple of other there's a lot to the end. I know it kind of goes on and on and on at the end of the dialogue, but all right. A couple of other points that you'll find there is teaching goodness is paid by goodness returned and not by money. Definitely a shot at the sophists, which was, by the way, the first thing that was going on here, right? Gorgias versus Socrates, sophists versus philosophers. Sophists get paid. Philosophers, Socrates didn't get paid to teach. It's teaching goodness is paid by goodness returned and not by money. And at the end of the dialogue, Socrates claims to be the only true statesman, and this is why he's killed. I mentioned before that Plato always mentions Socrates' trial. In death, always, just about almost every single thing. There's always some reference to it. Here it is, and in this case, he says, when Socrates gets hauled into court, it's like a doctor being hauled into court by a cook in front of a jury of children. So the cook's going to make up a bunch of sweets and candy, and the cook is going to make up a bunch of sweets and candy, and the doctor's going to hand out salads or something. And who is the jury going to believe? Note, by the way, that this means that who is the expert in matters of right and wrong, in justice? And he keeps saying this, that in the dialogue, it comes up several times. There must be an expert in terms of right and wrong and justice. And, it's Socrates himself. He's the only true statesman. And by the way, I should also note there, look, there is no way in hell that the real Socrates, the actual guy, would ever say that about himself. That's why you know this is Plato and not Socrates. Socrates is just a character in Plato's writing, and what Socrates says here is just Plato expressing his views. It's not the real Socrates, because he would never claim to be. He would never say that. Okay, so that's the Gorgias. It's a long and interesting read, but notice there's a lot of things covered. You got sophists versus philosophers. You got morality. You got who should have political power. All kinds of things are coming up in this, and it's a very interesting read, I think. I hope you think so too.